Good evening, class. My name is Patrick Moran. This is week 8 discussion of Al Qaeda. I hope you've all already watched the video, Dr. Manjikian's video about understanding fundamentalism, because it helps out with the readings for this week. I wish I had watched it before I did the reading. Unfortunately, I watched it after. But nonetheless, if you haven't done the readings yet, start with the video and then go into the readings. It'll be a lot more beneficial to you. Hope you like my kitchen behind me. This just happens to be where my office is, and in 3 weeks that'll all be new. We're remodeling. I'm going to just jump right into the readings. The most important reading this week was the text. The text gives a comprehensive review of Al Qaeda itself, which is primarily what we're discussing. We're discussing Islamic terrorism in general, but it really focuses on Al Qaeda. And as my thesis for the end of the semester is going to be on Al Qaeda, I decided to focus on Al Qaeda. But I will go over the other things that it talks about in the book with the other terrorist groups as well. The first and most interesting point that I got from the book, and it was just a small point at the bottom of page 382, and I've got my book right in here in front of me. That's what I'm flipping through with my notes to my left. Is in the 1990s, when Zawahiri, bin Laden's right-hand man, is talking about how he thought conditions in Egypt were conducive to revolution, and I thought that was a really valid sentence, because although we know that he was kind of maybe not necessarily right at the time, now with the Arab Spring and everything going on in Egypt and the way things are going in that country, it seems that maybe he was just a little premature on that prediction. It took about 15, 20 years, but it's happened. I don't know all the details of what he said exactly would happen, but certainly we've had some kind of revolution, and it has been violent, and there's Islamic fundamentalism involved with the Muslim Brotherhood and things along those lines. The next note that I came up to, just as the chapter goes through the history of how Al Qaeda kind of came to be, we get to page 385. In 1992, the bombing of a hotel in Yemen, which they call the opening shot in bin Laden's war on terrorism. The book is arguing that since before this point, Al Qaeda had been around, but they were kind of focused on Russia and organizing mujahideen and things along those lines. But now in 1992, this is now Osama bin Laden has targeted America specifically. He said, we're going to go after America, and this is what we're going to do. And then, of course, we have the Black Hawk Down incident in late 1992, late 1993, also October. And with the situation in Somalia in 1992, all these things started to build up. And, throughout the 90s, it was sort of a progression. We had the World Trade Center bombing, which was loosely connected to Al Qaeda. And, that wasn't directly bin Laden's hand, but certainly we see these things stepping up, and then the embassy bombings and on and on. Right over on 386, something I didn't know about Al Qaeda that I learned from the readings this week was that it was initially supposed to be called the World Islamic Front Against Jews and Crusaders. That was the 1998 video of Osama bin Laden sort of declaring official war on the far enemy, which was to be Israel and the West, specifically America, and how we generally call it Al Qaeda today, but the initial name here, at least in the video, he was calling it this World Islamic Front Against Jews and Crusaders. And the thing about it is that what the book goes on to say is that this is the first non-nation state terrorist group. Maybe not the first, but certainly the most significant first. All terrorist groups to this point had been nationalist based. They've been nationalist type terrorists. where they were fighting for. I mean, you had the PLO or you had the Irish Republican Army, where they essentially had a goal to establish a state, and it was a defined, realistic goal, and that's all they want. Whereas Al Qaeda, and plus they were identified with a state. The PLO had Palestine, the Irish Republican Army had Ireland. They were like, we're going to represent our state's interest, and we're supported by, at least tacitly, by leaders of our state. Whereas Al Qaeda was like, we're not necessarily associated with any state. We're for any Muslim that want to kill any American or any Westerner anywhere in the world. If you're with us, you're with us. If you're not, you're not. Which goes right into my next point on page 388, where they start talking about Al Qaeda weaknesses, and that is some significant weaknesses of Al Qaeda is they're very absolutist. Either you're with Al Qaeda or you're against Al Qaeda. You can't be. There is no halfway. At least that's what the book argues. What I would argue is that there is kind of a halfway, because even if you're not willing to strap a bomb to your chest, certainly Osama bin Laden or one of his affiliates, or Osama bin Laden's dead, but one of the Al Qaeda affiliates would be more than happy to take your money in support of any terrorist operations that they may be carrying out. And moving on through the reading, that was my point about nationless terrorism. I'm going to skip right over to 398. The interim pages there deal with Afghanistan and how we went to Afghanistan, how things happened in Afghanistan. I'm not going to bore you with the historical details of that. Also talking about Iraq. But if you skip over to page 398, we were told to pay close attention to page 395 through 398. And the most significant part in this, I felt, that really spoke to me, was the Sageman-Hoffman debate about these two intellectuals, but not intellectuals. I mean, intelligence officials, former Marine, sort of talking back and forth to each other about the threat of Al Qaeda. One is saying that Al Qaeda is no longer really a threat. Look, we've taken over Bin Laden. They don't have any core anymore. They're weakening. Yeah, they're still around. You got a roadside bomb here and there, but they're dying out. And then the other one saying, look, it's a lot more significant than that. It's a lot more significant than just a few roadside bombs. This organization, and this is where I would argue too. It kind of goes, hopefully, towards my thesis statement for the research, is that Al Qaeda, although it did start, as we learned in the text, as this sort of umbrella structure with a centralized command, and you had Bin Laden and Zawahiri at the top, and then they're going on down and talking to and giving orders to individual cells who, sorry, my screen just blinked out, and giving orders to individual cells who are then carrying out terrorist attacks. This, Hoffman is saying, yeah, it started that way, but now what it has become is sort of well, to use modern political, I mean, it's the Bain capital of terrorist groups. I mean, they go out and they help you start up your terrorist group. And it's not necessarily about Al Qaeda. And you have all these different groups calling themselves Al Qaeda and associated movements, which is what one of the videos talked about, the Center for Intelligence Study, or the CSIS.org, a video that we watched in that paper that we reviewed from them, where it's talking about Al Qaeda and associated movements. And the book kind of went on that there's different models of Al Qaeda associated movements. There's those that are genuinely like Al Qaeda offshoots that sort of started with Al Qaeda and then built up, which would certainly be Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. But then there's other ones that just kind of throw Al Qaeda onto their name and they don't really have anything to do with Al Qaeda, but in order to gain legitimacy or whatever, for whatever reason, they throw Al Qaeda onto the front. But I think what I'm trying to get at, and this is my own thoughts, this doesn't come from any of the readings, is that that's what Al Qaeda, that's the point of Al Qaeda. That's what they wanted to do in the first place. Certainly, they started out as an organized hierarchy and everything. They were sort of the frontal assault against the Russians, and all these different movements, and then they sort of organized everybody under their umbrella. But after 9/11, they've had to change their tactics, and it's not as simple anymore as Zawahiri and Bin Laden giving out the commands, or whoever the new leaders are, the new leaders that emerge. It's not about that anymore. Now it's about, okay, we're going to come into your organization and we're going to provide some training and we're going to provide what you do, and then you do it on your own. And if you want to call yourself Al Qaeda, cool. If not, if you want to call yourself Lashkar-e-Taiba or any of a number of other terrorist groups that we read about this week, by all means. But as long as the idea is there and the methodology and the overall goal of establishing an Islamic caliphate and things like that is the same, that's what's important. The rest of the text reading goes on to talk about the role of women in Al Qaeda, and not that that's not important. I don't want you to think my little facial expressions there are telling you not to read it. It's just I didn't make any significance of point on that because I don't want you guys to have to watch a 40-minute video. I'm trying to make it as short as possible because you had a lot of videos this week to watch. That's really all I had for the main text of this book. So I will move on now to the other readings. I'll quickly touch on the first two, which from Voices of Terror, which were the Menhem Begin and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, it's the Harkabi reading on pages 144 and 149, which sort of gave the two opposing views of the nationalist movements. The first one being the Israeli nationalist movement before Israel was a state, where they were sort of conducting terrorist attacks. Again, this sort of nationalist model against Palestinians in order to try to establish their state. That was the goal, that was the idea, and that's sort of how things were in the past. And then, of course, the Palestinian argument, same thing, hey, we're trying to establish Palestine, and we got to get Jordan in there. We got to get Jordan involved so that we can set up this, Islamic center and things like that. Those are, again, highlighting that nationalist model, which was sort of the standard before Al Qaeda came around. Al Qaeda is the really revolutionary terrorist group that sort of said, hey, you know what, we don't need to be attached to a nation. We don't have to have the idea of a nation state, because what we want is a global caliphate. We want every country to fall under our regime, under a caliph that will rule justly in accordance with Islam and all that fun stuff. Ayman al-Zawahiri is another one of our readings, The Knights Under the Prophet's Banner. And, he's really giving the argument that, and this is one of the other points I wanted to make, is what Al-Qaeda wanted to do is it knew it couldn't really appeal to everybody with its extremist views, because it's such an extreme view of Islam that what they had to do is they sort of had to say, well, if you want to join up for nationalist reasons, then cool. If you want to join up for religious reasons, even better. But we really don't care as long as you join up. Join up for one of those things. And so he's sort of making that argument. The quote from the get-go: the struggle for the establishment of the Muslim state cannot be considered a regional struggle, certainly not after it had been ascertained that what he describes as the Crusader alliance from the United States. On and on. Victory by the armies cannot be achieved unless the infantry occupies the territory. So basically he's saying, hey, we're for nationalism. We want that Palestinian state. We want, Muslims to be in control of solid territory. But really the goals are bigger than that, And if we could establish an Egyptian state that's very supportive of terrorism, would certainly be great. Palestine would certainly be even better. Whatever state would do that would be great, but we don't want to limit it to just religion, because that opens up the umbrella. It doesn't limit it, as we talked about one of the weaknesses being that they're so extreme. And then Hamas is sort of saying, hey, look, they're one and the same. I mean, if you're for nationalism, then you're for terrorism, because you can't have one without the other. we have to have the Palestinian state. We can't negotiate because the foundation of the Palestinian state is, in fact, Islam. We need to establish it, because if we give up a little piece of it, it's like giving up a little piece of religion. You can't have that if you want to be considered a true Muslim. That's all the text readings, and then we went on and we discussed the video where they were discussing sort of the future of Al Qaeda and where they're at and what are the different models. I really liked reading through some of the different models, where it's like either it's going to be, I think the most likely is model number 2, which is where they were talking about how it's going to be an affiliate based thing, where it's like I said, it's not going to really be Al Qaeda and they're in charge and they give the orders. It's going to be, well, yeah, this group, yeah. So we sort of took some tricks from Al Qaeda and made them our own, and now we're going to go do our stuff. And thanks Al Qaeda. Like I said, they're the bane capital of terrorist groups. And that's not a knock on Romney, by the way. It's just it's a good example because it's something in the news. There's what another one I like to use when discussing it is the McDonald's of terrorist groups, because they're really about a franchise. Like, here's a model of how you can do this, and then go out and carry it out in whatever way you want. It's a little bit different than the Animal Liberation Front or the Earth Liberation Front, which I've talked about a little bit in some of the discussions, where they say, you know what, anybody do anything and just say you did it in our name, and that'd be great for us. Al Qaeda really gets in there and says, here's a model, go out and do it. And so the second scenario in there is the most likely. They also talked about the scenario of Al Qaeda going away, which is certainly a possibility. But I don't think their training or their legacy would ever go away. And then the state and non-state actors, should the U.S. negotiate with the Taliban? We've sort of discussed this in past weeks, and the video is going kind of long, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. The state and non-state actors are, well, that's important. I mean, because we're talking about non-state actors and how they're different than state actors. Obviously, in some of the examples it gave when it was talking about the strengths of negotiating, I mean, it gave examples where President Bush negotiated with states, though. They were states. They were, it was Iran, it was Iraq. So I see a difference in that than in negotiating with a group that's not necessarily associated with state. But some of those strengths were actually good. I mean, if you can talk to elements of a group, even if they're not supported by any state, that are supportive to your goals, then why wouldn't you? Well, why just sit them down and see what they have to say and go from there. That's really all I have to say about those readings. Obviously, we have the 3 other readings that are for the discussion board. I'm not going to do those in this video because I'm going to go right now and go ahead and write my 250 word paper or 250 word discussion and comment on that. Please feel free to hit me up on the discussion board, and we can discuss those throughout the rest of this week. Thank you all. I hope your midterms went well, and I hope your spring break goes even better than that.